30! That is the number of women Ted Bundy confessed to murdering. Most of them were young. Most of them were students. Most of them were approached in broad daylight by a man who smiled at them, asked for help, and seemed perfectly safe. He worked at a suicide hotline. He volunteered in politics. He was called charming, articulate, and handsome by people who knew exactly what he had done. And on the morning of January 24th, 1989, after 10 years on death row, after exhausting every appeal, after confessing to everything, they strapped Ted Bundy into a wooden electric chair called Old Sparky, and they asked him if he had any final words. He hesitated. His voice quavered. And then he said 12 words that I have not been able to stop thinking about since I first read them, because they are not what you expect from a man like this. They are something far more disturbing than anything you expect. Here they are. I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends. Ted Bundy kidnapped, raped, and murdered at least 30 women across 7 states between 1974 and 1978. He decapitated at least 12 of them with a hacksaw. He kept some of their heads in his apartment. He returned to the remote sites where he had left the bodies, repeatedly, for months, until decomposition made it impossible to return. He described what he did in those visits to an FBI agent in clinical, unhurried detail, in the same tone of voice you would use to describe a hobby. He also worked a crisis hotline where he talked suicidal strangers back from the edge. Future best-selling crime writer Anne Rule sat beside him at that hotline for years. She later described him as, quote, kind, solicitous, and empathetic. She did not know, nobody knew, that was the point. Bundy himself named this. He called it the entity, a second self that existed beneath the surface of the normal man, a thing that wanted possession, that needed control, that could be sedated for months, then could not be stopped. He was arrested in 1975. He escaped from custody twice. The second escape lasted 2 weeks. He drove to Florida and killed 3 more people. At his murder trial in 1979, which was the first nationally televised criminal trial in US history, he acted as his own attorney, cross-examined witnesses, and proposed marriage to his girlfriend from the courtroom floor. The judge, after sentencing him to death, told him, "It is a tragedy for this court to see such a waste of humanity. You'd have made a good lawyer." He spent 10 years on death row, 10 years to think about what he would say at the end, 10 years to repair. January 23rd, 1989, the night before. Outside Florida State Prison in Rayford, hundreds of people had already gathered in a field across the road. They were drinking beer, eating donuts, banging pans together. Some of them had driven from other states. One group was selling t-shirts. Another had made a sign that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." Inside, Ted Bundy was meeting with his FBI agent. His name was Bill Hagmaier. He had spent 4 years interviewing Bundy on death row, more than 200 hours of recorded conversations. He was, by all accounts, the closest thing Bundy had to a genuine friendship at the end of his life. That night, Hagmaier spent 20 hours listening to Bundy confess. Murder by murder, state by state. Bundy confirmed 30 killings across 7 states, including details of his crimes he had never disclosed to anyone. He told Hagmaier he had taken Polaroid photographs of most of his victims. He said, "When you work hard to do something right, you don't want to forget it." He then confessed to killing Kimberly Leach. She was 12 years old. She was the crime he had denied for a decade. He confessed it quietly, without emotion, the night before his execution. At some point that evening, Bundy talked about suicide. He did not want to give the state the satisfaction of watching him die. Hagmaier talked him through the mechanics of the execution. What would happen in sequence? He did this so Bundy would not be afraid. At around 4:50 in the morning, Bundy was given the standard last meal: steak, eggs, hash browns and toast. He didn't touch it. He called his mother twice. Louise Bundy was in Tacoma, Washington. At the end of the second call, she told him, "You'll always be my precious son." His wife, Carol, the woman he had proposed to and legally married from the courtroom floor, had stopped visiting years earlier. When Bundy began confessing in his final days, she took their daughter Rose, moved to Washington, and refused to accept his last phone call on the morning of his execution. She was, by all accounts, destroyed by what she learned. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Bundy was escorted to the execution chamber. A witness who was present, journalist Tim Swarens, later wrote that Bundy jerked back, appearing startled when he first saw Old Sparky. The large oak chair waiting in the middle of the room. Guards strapped his chest, his arms, his legs. They shaved a patch on his right leg and on his head and attached the electrodes. A thick leather strap was fitted diagonally across his face from jaw to ear, compressing the left side of his nose. A black metal skull cap was bolted in place with a heavy veil that fell over his face. 42 witnesses watched from behind a plexiglass window. Superintendent Tom Barton asked Ted Bundy if he had any final words. The killer hesitated. His voice quavered. He looked at Jim Coleman, his attorney, and Fred Lawrence, the Methodist minister who had prayed with him the night before, and he said, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." Then the thick strap was pulled across his mouth. The veil dropped. Barton gave the signal. An anonymous executioner behind a partition pushed a button. 2,000 volts surged through the wires. Bundy's body tensed. His hands clenched into fists. A small puff of smoke rose from his right leg. After 60 seconds, the machine was switched off. His body went limp. A paramedic opened his shirt and listened for a heartbeat. A second man aimed a light into his eyes. At 7:16 in the morning, Ted Bundy was pronounced dead. Outside, in the field across the road, the crowd cheered. At Florida State University, where Bundy had murdered Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy 11 years earlier, the Chi Phi fraternity hosted a cookout that morning. They called it Bundy Burgers and electrified hot dogs. They hung a banner over the entrance that read, "Watch Ted fry, see Ted die." The people who came to celebrate were not wrong to feel what they felt. But I want to go back to those 12 words, because I think we have been misreading them for 37 years. Now I want to take those words apart, because most people here, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends," and they feel something. They categorize it as softness or humanity, or maybe a last desperate grab for grace, and then they move on. I want to suggest that moving on that quickly is exactly what Ted Bundy designed those words to make you do. Bundy's dominant psychological trait, confirmed by every clinical assessment conducted across his decade on death row, was not rage and not chaos. It was control. He was classified by the FBI as a power and control killer. His need was not destruction, it was possession. Total, absolute possession of another person. The murders were the endpoint of that possession, not the point itself. He told Hagmaier that he revisited his victims' bodies because, and I am quoting directly, "If you've got time, they can be anything you want them to be." This is a man who never, at any point in his adult life, said anything he did not intend. Not to investigators, not to juries, not to the women he lured with his arm in a sling, asking for help carrying a boat. So the question you have to hold in your mind about those 12 words is this: was that love? Or was it the final performance of a man who had been performing love his entire life and could not stop even in the chair? Think about it from his perspective. In that room were 42 witnesses. Behind them, a press pool. By that afternoon, every newspaper in America would print his last words. He knew that. He had 10 years to know that. He also knew, because Hagmaier had told him, that his wife had refused his final phone call, that she had taken their daughter and left, that the woman who believed in him to the end had finally stopped believing. And he chose, as his last act on earth, to send love to family and friends. 3 interpretations. Here is the first. He could have said nothing. Silence is what many expected. The arrogant Bundy, the one who acted as his own lawyer and cross-examined survivors from the stand. That Bundy would have died in contemptuous silence, denying the state even the weight of his final words. He did not do that. He could have said something designed for history. McVeigh would choose a poem. Gacy would spit profanity. The defiant last word that becomes the quote, the headline, the footnote in textbooks. Bundy did not do that either. He chose 12 words that sounded to most ears in that room like the words of a normal man saying goodbye, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if those words were not for his family at all? What if they were for us? Bundy spent his entire adult life manufacturing a specific effect in the people around him. The effect of being seen as human, warm, safe. He built it deliberately, consciously, as a tool of predation. Every woman who got into his car did so because she had received the signal. This man is normal. This man is kind. This man is not dangerous. The last thing Ted Bundy ever said to the world was that exact signal, delivered not to a woman on a lakeshore, but to 42 witnesses, a press pool, and every person who would ever read about this moment. He manufactured humanity in his last breath, and it worked. 37 years later, people still debate whether those words were genuine, whether there was something real in them, whether, at the very end, he was capable of love. That debate is the performance. The debate is the point. Because here is the thing about control as a dominant psychological drive. It does not stop at death. It cannot stop. A man whose entire architecture is built around being perceived a certain way does not abandon that architecture on the gurney. He uses it one final time on the largest audience of his life. The FBI later examined Bundy's brain after his execution. They were looking for structural abnormalities, damage, lesions, anything that might explain what he was. They found nothing. His brain was entirely normal, which means those 12 words came from the same neurological machinery that produces love in every other human being on earth. He did not have the brain of a monster. He had your brain. He had mine. He simply used it differently. I believe that is what those 12 words were. Not love, not softness, not grace. The last, most refined iteration of the only thing Ted Bundy ever felt. The need to be perceived as something he was not. He spent his entire life performing humanity. His last words were the final performance, and it worked. Carol Ann Boone, the woman who married him in court, who believed in his innocence for years, who had a child with him on death row, never spoke publicly again after his execution. She moved to an unknown location. She changed her name. She took their daughter Rose, whose existence Bundy had engineered partly as another delay tactic, and she disappeared entirely from public record. When reporters tracked her down briefly years later, she said only, "I have nothing to say about that period of my life." I have thought about that sentence more than I have thought about his last words. Because she is not describing grief. She is not describing anger. She is describing the complete erasure of a self that had been built around a man who did not exist. That is what the performance costs. Not just the victims, not just the families, but everyone who received the signal and believed it. After Bundy's execution, his brain was removed and sent to a laboratory. Scientists examined it for 2 years. They were looking for the thing that made him different. They found that his brain was structurally indistinguishable from any other human brain they had ever examined. There was no damage, no lesion, no abnormality. His brain looked like yours.